Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Gibson, and I'm joined today by, as I call everyone who I see for the first time in a long time, the man, the myth, the legend, Jake Remmert, PhD, uh, almost Florida Atlantic University alum with his PhD, and then also Jessie Stemo, the great Jessie, who brings so much warmth and intelligence and curiosity to the podcast. So everyone will get to benefit from this. And we're going to talk specifically today about muscle hypertrophy and how that would inform training or how it would inform coaching. And I thought the best way to do that is not to get super sciencey and in the weeds and talk about mechanisms, but instead to hand the baton off to Jessie and keep it a little more practical, what I would call actually high level, and informative. So, um, you know, obligatory. Jake, how are you? Jessie, how are you?
Doing well. Just starting the day, I guess.
Yeah,
Same.
I'm excited to
Uh,
be here.
Me too. Thanks for having me, guys.
yeah, awesome.
Well, Jake,
No better.
do you
No,
want
good.
to start by introducing yourself to people who don't know you and tell them about what things you're most excited to learn and share about?
Yeah. So I guess as Josh said, I'm working on my PhD right now. I got a little bit left. I'm getting close.
Uh,
I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Uh, so we're working through that. Also do online coaching for hypertrophy, strength,
Mhm.
whatever people are interested, sort of in that realm, fat loss, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And try to, in my fleeting spare time, try to put some sort of educational stuff out on the internet. Um, Try to pay back some of the just wealth of knowledge that I have gotten over the years, and give back to the community a little bit. And it's just fun to talk about stuff, right? So, um, I'm trying to do this kind of thing whenever I get the opportunity. So I appreciate you guys inviting me. It's always super fun. As far as what I'm excited about, I don't know, man. It's fun to lift weights, right? It's fun to try to get as jacked as we can or as
yep.
strong as we can, whatever the goal is. For me, it's I didn't do so great at the strong thing, so I'm going to try to do the jacked thing. And so that's the journey I'm on personally. But it's fun to talk about both, and whatever we get into today, I'm sure will be fun. And I actually love that you mentioned that the like practical side of things is the actual high level stuff. I completely like we can talk about science all day long, but at the end of the day, it only gives us so much, right? So I love that you framed it that way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel
I
like true understanding of the science leads to really intentional application to
yeah.
your people. Like, if you don't truly understand what's going on, then how can you actually help the person coming to you with their goals? So,
Yeah, I would say I had this I've really probably overly intellectual conversations most of the time because as soon as I start talking to someone, I engage with them on a really kind of like deep, kind of like meaningful level. And I was talking to my buddy last night and I was thinking of, how do we express our beliefs? How do we come to understand them and communicate them? And a lot of that is like you don't really understand them. They're just like processed beneath the hood and then they come out. And I think with coaching, that's how I think about it. It's like if I can consume as much information as possible, if I can understand what the literature says based on limitations, if I can understand how coaches operate, how they wrote programs, how athletes respond by watching them and coaching them, that stuff is going to manifest itself in like the best product I can present. It kind of sounds somewhat deterministic, and we could talk, all that stuff on a different podcast. But I think with something you're doing, Jake, and with something what I'm doing, where it's like you have to understand the literature, so you just have to read a ton about a specific topic. You're going to be so well informed that even if it's not entirely relevant, it's going to change practice just based on the way information kind of will kind of come together and then express itself in like writing a program. And sometimes that's hard to communicate and verbalize. And I think what you're doing as well, and Jessie, what you're doing and what I do, is that we're able to create a formal process of being able to put it on paper or to put it into a podcast or put it into a video and then communicate that to people and share it so that when we have these conversations, we can say, oh, this is my system. I know what my system is because I talk about it all the time and I have to bring that information forth.
Yeah. So, Jake, what's your athletic background and timeline of like being in sport and then coaching and then now being in the PhD program? Like what was your progression in those things timeline wise?
Yeah. So like a lot of people, I started lifting a little bit in high school for sports, and that's actually I very very quick tangent. I have been roughly a similar size since like the summer before sixth grade, up to now. I was 5'11", however much I
Wow.
weighed at the time, 170 or something, right? Um, I just hit a growth. I was bigger than every. It was awesome, right? I was great at sport, and people caught up to me, right? But ever since then, the local high school, was like, get this kid in football now, right? And I didn't want to do it. I was like, I'm a basketball guy. I don't want to do football. And so my freshman year, I finally was like, all right, I'll try it, whatever. And I hated it, and I quit the team after a couple months. But the benefit, they got me in the weight room for the first time, right? So that was really the beginning, and just kind of did that sort of through high school, and was pretty consistent when it was for the sports teams and stuff, because we did it for basketball also. But then later, it kind of became more hit and miss, and I didn't really know what I was doing. The coaches didn't really know what they were doing either. Um, and then after, towards the end of high school, like my senior year, it tapered off pretty hard. And then I had a couple years, like 2 years after high school, where I didn't lift at all. It kind of just wasn't part of my life. And then fall of 2014, I was like, I missed this. Let me try to do this again. And I got in and I was hooked. I don't know what it was that was different, but I was hooked this time. And so we just kind of ran with it. I still didn't know what I was doing, but I was at least consistent, and I was figuring it out slowly but surely, and found a bunch of great information pretty early on, which I'm so thankful for. Stumbled on Lane Norton almost right away, and it's like a pretty good starting point, right? Um, and then you find 3DMJ, and you find Revive Stronger, and just all these just wealths of information. So that was immensely helpful as I was going, and then it was also helpful because all of those people I saw, not only did they teach how to do this training thing, but they were all online coaches. And I was like, well, how do I do that? That sounds fun, right? And so I wanted to do that, and I was sort of trying to learn how to coach and learn how to train. And I was like, well, man, how do you stand out? There's 1.5 million of these people. I'll get a PhD, right? So, which is hilarious in hindsight. But I was like, well, Lane Norton has a PhD. Brad Schoenfeld has a PhD. All these people. Israel has a PhD. Maybe I'll do it. And so I just started. I went back to school, and I had just been working at a Target full time at the time, and I hated it. But I was like, this will get me through until I go back to school. So that's what we did. We just dove in, and along my early the first year or two of school was when I found powerlifting and got sucked into that really deep. Competed, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. I was never amazing. I did one college national meet, but like the qualifying totals were a lot lower than they are these days. So yeah, but it was fun. I loved it, and we were just doing that for a few years, and then I think this was summer or fall of, I think it was summer of 2019. So now we're like almost 5 years deep into training. Most of that has been powerlifting. And I had a, not horrible, but like a lower back, I hesitate to even call it an injury, but it was enough that like I couldn't squat or deadlift for, a month or something, right? And I was like, okay, well, I can't do that. Let me do some leg extensions and whatever. And I was working with, we mentioned before the call Ryan Doris, who's been my coach forever. And I was working with him for powerlifting, and I was just like, man, this dude did bodybuilding, and he was pretty good at it, right? So let me see if he can get me jacked. So I was like, hey, what if we try this bodybuilding style? And did that for a couple months, and I just was like, dude, this is fun, right? So wanted to try to compete. So that was the very end of 2019 that I was like, yeah, let's do this.
Wow.
And then early 2020, I was 5 weeks out and something happened, that all the shows got canceled. So I couldn't actually compete, though I got close. And at this point, we're sort of in, this is end of undergrad, starting my master's. Sort of when this is, I'm about to start my master's when this is happening. And so, we're in lockdowns and all this nonsense. But, I recently started coaching a little bit at the gym I trained at. So it's like everything's kind of happening at the same time. And then the master's started and I moved to Florida and start actually doing some research, and luckily found out I like it, because like,
Yeah.
man, if I had set that PhD goalpost and found out I hated research, like, geez, dude, that's tough. So I'm glad that it worked out well. And since then, which is crazy that we're now 5 years after that point,
Wow.
that how time has flown since the
Yeah.
pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, so we just kind of slowly been doing the research thing, working through all the grad school stuff, coaching more and more, and training, and then eventually was like, hey, I want to try to compete again. And we actually did it this time, right? So back in November,
Nice.
I did my first actual
Wow.
bodybuilding shows, which was it felt amazing to finally like have that off my back, And I already can't wait to do it again. I'm going to wait, a couple of years at least, right, to build some more muscle. But yeah, I don't know, it's weird. It's like it's been a whirlwind of sort of all three of those things happening at once between school, training, and coaching. But at the same time, it's felt smooth. I don't know. It's kind of odd, but yeah, that's my life story, I suppose.
Yeah. That's I mean, that's cool that you really have done them all sort of concurrently. It seems like it's not like you had this, okay, I was an athlete for this many years, now I'm in school for this many years, or coached, and then now, like, they're weaving all together in a really cool way. So how, I guess I want to ask two questions, but I feel like you could go whichever direction you feel with it. I guess one would be, how has you competing informed how you work with your clients? And then also, like, what things within your education are currently like informing how you work with your clients?
Great questions. I guess, funny enough, I feel like competing has actually impacted my coaching a little bit more than the research stuff has. Research is awesome, right? And I love it dearly. But, like, I don't have kids, but I hear people say this. Maybe this analogy will blow up in my face, but, it's like you love your kids and you know them really well. You know them so well, you know what they suck at also, right? And it's kind of like that with research at the same
Yeah.
time. Like, it's awesome, but I think it's at its best when it can give us like a framework, and then we work within that. And the irony of going down this path is I'm noticing over time a lot of research is coming out, and it's like supporting what the bros knew all along, right? Like this last paper that we published is all about the effect of per session volume on muscle growth and on strength. And like, without going down the rabbit hole, unless you guys want to, but at least suffice it to say, it's like the results are like, we kind of already knew this, dude. Like, this is what people do. Now we just have the data that shows it, right? So yeah, science is great, but like everybody says, it's the old cliche. Like, it'll never tell you exactly how to train, or it'll give you some guardrails. It'll give you a framework, and then you got to figure out how to do things within that. And it can teach you some mechanisms or some relationships between variables and things like that that can help guide decision making. I think that's really helpful. That's probably the biggest thing, to be honest, that I've been able to apply to coaching, is just seeing and learning about and understanding more deeply those relationships, and like seeing all the data on the dose response of volume and muscle growth or whatever, right? And just having that in the back of my head that can help to make some of those decisions on, like, should we increase set numbers for a client, or should we decrease it, or should we whatever. Competing, on the other hand, though, I think has been, man, you can't just read about that and get it. You know, like you can understand a good amount of it from reading or watching people or whatever, but there's some stuff you don't get unless you actually get in there and get your hands dirty. And like, I don't want that to sound gatekeepy, but
Yeah.
it is what it is, right? And that's been so invaluable to me, to be able to obviously relate to other clients who want to compete. I think that's important. But like you learn like weird stuff. Like when I had a few days where I was eating 70 grams of carbs a day, right? Not super fun. But now I found out some weird food choice things
Yeah.
that now, like, if I'm working with a female who weighs 100 and like, I'm helping my girlfriend diet right now. She just can't eat as much as like a large male would. So now, like, I have lived experience of like, oh, well, here's how you make 100 grams of carbs go a long way, or, well, relatively speaking. But, you know, so you get some little things like that, or just a lot of the psychological things of like, man, this is hard, dude. And I want to quit, but at the same time, I have this goal that means a lot to me. How do I try to rearrange my psychology to keep going? And um, those sorts of things I think are extremely helpful for coaching. And even just on my end, like, you know, going through the prep, it's like, in hindsight, it's so funny. In the moment, it doesn't feel that bad, but in hindsight, it's like, how did you do this? Like, there's
Yeah.
you're. I'm in grad school. You know, I have multiple research projects going on.
Yeah.
I'm training for hour and a half, 5 times a week. I'm doing an hour of cardio a day. It's all the meal prep. It's coaching, content. Like, just how does this work? So you learn all these like time management things, and like prioritizing and organization and those kinds of skills that I think help logistically with coaching and stuff. So yeah, it's all of it has helped a ton in a lot of different ways, which I think is great. And it's just been sort of a, I don't know, kind of weirdly well-rounded, beneficial experience over the last
Yeah.
couple
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, so it sounds like your education is providing that framework, whereas your experience is helping you communicate that too and actually apply it well with with your athletes. I
Well
like that.
said. See, you said in 10 seconds what I said in 10 minutes. I like that.
Yeah. Well, and I was gonna point out the fact that you said lived experience, and I'm most impressed by that because normally I'm the person who says that and talks about phenomenology and lived experience and all that really really cool stuff. One thing I did want to double click on, um, you talked about your work, which has basically just shown us from a research standpoint what we already knew. For people who aren't familiar with that, what we already knew, how would you explain kind of like the current understanding of like training volume as we understand it?
Yeah. So essentially okay. We um we are somewhat masochistic in our lab, and we for some reason decide to do like these really difficult and hugely time consuming projects. So this has literally been like 2 years in the making trying to get
Wow.
these papers out, and we ended up we split it into two papers because there's just so much. And what we wanted to do was update, basically do a new meta-analysis on that impact of volume on hypertrophy and strength, which the most recent one, uh, yeah, there's one from Basval in 2020, but um, the most recent comprehensive one, I guess I could say, is the Schoenfeld 2017, and like it's 2025 now, right? We just have a lot more studies. There's different ways to analyze the data, so we just wanted to update it and get it, a new one. And then we were also like, man, no one's looked at this per session volume stuff, and that was actually really important for my dissertation project, that we needed to figure out anyway. So I was like, oh, we might as well, right? So as one does, let's do a meta-analysis to figure out one number for your study design. But so we decided to do that, and then we're like, okay, well, how do we figure this out? Well, we need all the studies that manipulate volume, but also the studies that manipulate frequency, because like the interplay of those two is how you get the per session volume, right? So we gathered all those studies, and we're like, well, we might as well meta-analyze frequency also because we got all the data. So it wound up just being this huge thing, and so we have one paper that came out back in, I think we preprinted it originally in October, that is Josh Pelland is the lead author on that one, and that one's like total weekly volume and weekly frequency, the impact of those on hypertrophy and strength. And then this one that we just preprinted last month is the per session volume stuff. And so what people have already kind of done for a long time is, and I think this is interesting, that our data I think can support a variety of approaches pretty well. And this is sort of what I mean. So like there's some people, and I'm sure you guys have seen this, like very staunchly low volume approach, right? Because there's diminishing returns the more volume you do. And then other people are like, no, dude, more volume's better, right? Let's just do as much as you can recover from, and and it's like kind of both are true, right? Like if you look at the curves of in the graphs, the results, certainly those early sets are the ones that give you the most of the outcome, and it kind of tapers off as you go. You do still continue to get more, but it tapers off. And the total weekly stuff, it was like continues to increase, up to like 30, 31 sets a week, something like that, which I know sounds like a lot, but if you think about bodybuilders, that's not egregious, right? People have been doing that and more for a long time. For strength, it's significantly less, but that's not crazy. We look at the per session volume stuff, and it's like, especially those first 3, 4, 5 sets in a workouts where you're getting the huge majority of the results, and then once you get up to like 10 or 11 sets in a session is where it starts to be like, might not be worth doing more, right? Which is pretty reasonable, I think, right? Like, even your low volume people, it's like 3 sets in a workout, people do that, or 10 sets of chest on a push day. Like that's not unheard of. And, so I think it can support a lot of those things, and it's within those ranges. I think a lot of people train at anyway. And, which makes sense, right? Coaches and people who train, like they've been doing this for a long time, man. Like they're not just going to do stupid stuff that doesn't make any sense. If they're constantly, they're trying to do 100 sets in a session, like they're going to find out pretty quick that doesn't work, Yeah. So it's funny to me. And we've had this kind of stuff with like the protein research and with rest periods and with, all of these things that it just seems to, always come back to like, yeah, people have been doing this for a while. And obviously it's great to have the actual data to have more confidence in that, and maybe stop second guessing so many things and whatnot. But yeah. Oh, sorry. One last thing I should clarify. When I talk about those set numbers from those studies, technically they're what we call fractional sets, which is like, take your biceps, for example. A set of bicep curls would be like a full set, whereas a set of like a row or a lat pull down or something like that would be like half of a set. It's like an indirect movement. So it's a little bit funky, but more or less you can think of it in the set numbers. If you want to be really correct, so to speak, it'd be the fractional stuff. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that completely makes sense, because as a coach, as opposed to being a researcher where there's a long, you mentioned years for a project, and I don't think it's uncommon to have projects running for years or long spans of time to provide you with some insight. As a coach, you're getting insight today. It's like we're doing something that's going to provide me insight like immediately after it's done. And days after and weeks after and months after. So that process of iteration is just shorter. And to where, I like how we call it bro science, and we kind of play it down and make it sound kind of like caveman-esque or cave person-esque. It's like in reality, people want to do well and people want to get results, and they're going to find what works, and they're going to move closer to that. We fucking figured out fire, and and like technology and steamships and all that stuff. Like, I think we can figure out how to train to get big, and strong. And I think that like iterative process that's very short on a time scale, and then we have so many people doing it, and so many people talking about it. It's like, yeah, of course we're going to get pretty close. And I think trying to figure out why, or trying to figure out the details, the nuances, and then compare them to say like, well, I think this one might be better based on the setup or this study or whatever. Yeah, there's something there, but I love that you give more credit, or a lot of credit, to people who just have a lot of experience, who've been in the trenches, because they want to win. They're competitive. They want to do well, or they're getting paid for other people to do well, so they'll figure it out, So I really appreciate that. from your perspective. Yeah.
I mean, I don't see how there's any other way, to be honest. I mean, like there are some people out there who are very like evidence-based means I do what the research says, right? I'm like, research is slow, dude, and we keep finding stuff that's like, oh, these early studies didn't really have the best methods. We've just learned better now and stuff, right? So it's constantly evolving, and like we said earlier, it can give you those guidelines, which is cool, but as you very well pointed out, like we need to know what to do today, right? Like, and we need to make these adjustments. And that's funny enough. My dissertation, I'm trying to kind of bridge that gap a little bit. And very briefly, what I'm trying to look at is like, how do we auto-regulate set volume session to session to sort of not just account for like you come in, it's just a bad day or it's a really good day or whatever, but to also try to like dial in how much volume we're doing. And because if we don't have some way to auto-regulate it, it's like, well, are we just guessing? We could probably do better than that, right? So, and the whole study design is literally taken from what people do in the gym and what they seem to find good results with, right? Like, how many times have we heard Mike Israetel and Steve Hall and all these guys talk about like, what's your performance like? Are you getting pumped? Are you sore? All these things. And you use those as various metrics and you look at the overall picture, like, oh, based on X, Y, and Z, maybe we can do another set and we'd be fine. Or maybe we're doing too much. We should pull back. And like that's what we're looking at, which is awesome. And I love how much science and practice can influence each other, right? Like that's something that I really find important is like, what are people doing in the field? This seems to work. Okay, let's go test it in the lab, right? And we find whatever we find, and maybe that influences how people do things in practice. Maybe it doesn't, but like there's a constant feedback loop both ways, I think, so that ultimately they both get better over time. But yeah, it's just you can't, I don't know, you can't ignore what's happening in the real world, right? It's impossible.
Yeah. How do you use, so in your one-on-one coaching, like how do you use data tracking and analysis to get a better idea of like what is happening that session to session, day to day?
Yeah. So my approach on this has kind of changed a little bit, to be honest. Like I've kind of, these days I'm a little bit less on the like really like hard data, like formally tracking a lot of things. I still obviously will track some things, but the things I put the most stock in is just talking to the person, right, and getting that feel. But let's say if someone's focused on strength, usually I'll look at like estimated 1 rep max and sort of how that's changing over time, and different, how many sets that they're doing in what we would think of as like sets of 5 or less versus higher rep sets. And I think that's kind of helpful to think of those slightly separately. But tracking, how much work they're doing, how hard that work is on average, like an average RPE or in those different ranges. I found those things to be helpful. I used to talk to clients about like, rate your session RPE, like how hard was the session as a whole and things like that. And I'm just like, man, people have a hard time rating that. And, so used to ask people about sleep and stuff like that. Just like, man, it just didn't seem super helpful, right? And it was just sort of bogging people down with needing to track a million things. And then you have people where they felt fine, but the minute they had to write down that they only got 5 hours of sleep, all of a sudden now they don't feel so good, and we got to adjust training. And you're like calling attention to things without needing to, and I don't know, but like those are the main training things I'd look at for strength. Try to keep it pretty simple, and then I have clients like track their training in a spreadsheet, so I can look through everything in great detail myself. But at least on their end, they don't need to feel like they're answering all the 10 different Likert scales and all these things. Like we just don't need to do that all the time, in my opinion. Hypertrophy is honestly even more simple. It's kind of those same things, just minus the estimated 1 RM stuff, just because that doesn't matter so much. And looking more so at set numbers and generally how their performance is trending over longer time frames, like multiple weeks, and even multiple months sometimes, and subjective fatigue levels too, right? Like my philosophy on hypertrophy training is pretty simple. It's like, let's figure out how much you can do and recover, and let's do that. basically. And then when you need a break, we'll take a break. Like, why deload more often than we have to? But then obviously we need to do it when we need to do it. And so just talking to the person, getting a feel for how they're feeling, not just physically, soreness and feeling run down and lethargic and those things, those matter, but also motivation to train, or some people get like general mood disturbance stuff. They're just like, I just don't like, I need a break, right?
Yeah.
And so getting a feel for those things, but I don't really like having like a 1 to 10 scale that I ask people to rate those on all the time. I just want to talk to them, I find that so much easier. So that's honestly about all I do on the training side. I have all the training data I can look through, but in terms of having clients enter those things into a spreadsheet or something, it's just that. And if I'm doing nutrition with somebody too, it's usually, either it's tracking macros, or if they want to do more habit-based things, we can do that. Or so the nutrition looks wildly different depending on the person. There's some people where it's very like, they're very type A and they're very, I will hit my macros perfectly. And other people don't want to mess with that at all. And they want to do, did you have protein at every meal? Did you eat vegetables today? Did you, just big picture stuff. I have some people where we have like these goals, and then they have like little check boxes they can tick. And then for the week, there's a little progress bar that I put in the spreadsheet that fills up to make it like a game.
Nice.
They're trying to chase that, so you can do all kinds of fun, creative stuff just depending on what suits the person. But yeah, I hope that answers that. That was kind of an all over the place answer, but
yeah, I think so. I mean, I think when it comes to getting feedback from your athletes, it's tricky because a lot of times with things like your perceived fatigue, it's so subjective. And then, like you mentioned with the sleep tracking, I was just having a conversation with an athlete who was talking about getting a Whoop or something. And I was like, man, I feel like it maybe can be helpful, holds you accountable to getting more sleep. But I know so many people have had so many athletes who I feel like you can see it happen when they show up to the gym, their Whoop tells them they're under recovered, and then they like accept defeat before they even start that session. And so it's like you have to figure out, okay, is the information that we're gathering worth the potential risk of this throwing off their mindset in a training session? And so what you were saying about just like have a relationship with the athlete, figure out what they need, have conversations about them so that you can identify when they're feeling burnt out. Like, yeah, it makes complete sense to me.
And sometimes like you get to know somebody and you realize like they think they're really beat up, but they're not. It's like, you can keep going, dude. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But there's no way to get that from a spreadsheet. You got to just talk to them. And some people do great with like the Whoop. And like I had a client for years and years named Jessie. He's the man. I love this guy to death. And he was really good at, he would see the Whoop data and he'd be like, oh, I know that's wrong. I feel fine. Or like, so some people can do it great. Some people get easily swayed. Velocity is the same way. Like I've worked with some people where we've tried to use like barbell velocity to help with the programming. And in theory, it's great because it's very objective, but it's not perfect. And, I've had some people where we tried to use it and it didn't work at all. They would get too attached to the numbers, or they would, their recovery and their technique weren't as predictable as they need to be for the velocity to really be useful. Like you need someone who's like a machine for it to be great. And it just wasn't worth all the trouble. And then I'm working with somebody right now he uses velocity a ton and it's perfect for him, right? So it depends on the person for sure also.
Yeah, well, I think that's where, when we talk about research and science, when we talk about the technology that's generally used, I think going through, a program where you learn about the technology that like a lot of people use to measure those things. So for example, I'm doing a lot of like force plate testing, and there's a lot of talk about like different devices to track like distance and player load and all those things. And you realize like the number isn't a perfect representation of what you're trying to measure. There's a lot of room for error. There's also like, how does a company actually measure it? Like, what do they take into consideration to give you a player load or to tell you that you've produced that much force? So you realize like things aren't as like clean cut and tidy, so when you get a sleep score, it's like, how are they actually measuring that? If they give you like a readiness score, how do they measure that? So I think it's easy to identify it and take those on as like, I've only slept 8 hours or 6 or 7 or 5 or whatever it is. There's no way I can be recharged and recovered. And it's like, how do they actually track that number? Like, what does the number actually tell you? And I think having better insight into what those numbers mean just allow you to say like, like Jessie, like, I don't really need to pay attention to that. Like, I'm probably good, and have more autonomy and control. And I think as coaches, I'm probably similar to you, Jake. Like, I track stuff, like I track reps and I track reps for certain exercises, and I try to have a good sense of the work we're doing. I really just want you to make progress. And if you're making progress, like I'm doing enough. And if I'm not, like what can I modify to get there? But it's not like comprehensive overhauled system to be perfectly in tuned with velocity and fatigue. And it's like there's more weight on the bar this week than last. We're good.
They're fine.
We're crushing it,
Or like, sorry, just really quick. I'm really glad you brought that up, that it matters how they measure it and stuff. Like that's uh, even a great example of that is again with the sleep stuff. Like, how do they measure it, and also is it accurate at all? Like a lot of these trackers are they're not validated in the research, and they can be off by quite a bit. Even like this one, I bought this one. I'm doing a case study for my bodybuilding prep that's still going, annoyingly enough, because we're doing the recovery period also. But the reason we got this one is because it was the most accurate we could find, and it's not even that great, to be honest, with sleep stuff. It's great with steps, and it can do total sleep pretty well, but it tries to give you like REM sleep, light sleep, deep sleep, and it's just not not amazing. That matters a ton, and even stuff you can make an argument like photos and circumference measurements too, right? Like
Yeah.
in theory, those are awesome for muscle growth, but like, did you get the same lighting every time?
Yeah.
Are you bloated today? All those kinds of things. How hydrated are you? Did you put the measurement tape in the exact same spot? Are you flexing a little bit? There's so many things that make it imperfect, and so it's not that it's not worth doing. Like I try to get pictures from people who are doing hypertrophy training and stuff, but like we always have to, as the coaches at least, we have to keep in mind the imperfections and the limitations of what we're gathering, and as you said, look at everything on the whole. Try not to be too swayed by any one piece of data, and at the end of the day, if they're making progress, then it's working.
Yeah, well, and Jesse, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, but you're talking about kind of like reliability, to the ability to get the same thing over and over and over again. And I would almost argue that can be incredibly important, even more. I hate to say more so compared to validity, but it's like if I'm measuring reps in a certain way and I do it in a really, really flawed way, but it gives me some sort of predictable measurement. It's like at least I know when I change something, it could have a relationship with the thing that changes. Where if it's not valid, it's like who gives a fuck? Like it's useless. It's a useless thing. It's useless because when you talk about hypertrophy training, where my brain goes as a weightlifting, powerlifting coach is, I just kind of like we're gonna do 3 exercises that are hypertrophy focused, and they're gonna be full range, and we're gonna do higher reps and just train them hard. That's like the extent of like me measuring hypertrophy work, which isn't great. So I would say to you, Jake, like, well, how do I take what you're talking about, integrate it into my practice to do a better job? And maybe Jesse, I would almost wonder if you kind of have that same question of like, as a weightlifting, powerlifting coach or strength coach, you just say like hypertrophy is like the icing on. We just toss some stuff in. Would there be a way for us to track or understand or know or do a better job like servicing that out instead of just like we'll do some chest flies and maybe some deficit push-ups, and that's our like upper body work?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, yes and no, right? Like ultimately, if what they care about the most is strength, if they're getting stronger, you know what I mean? Like, cool, that's what we want. Um, can we be a little bit more granular with things? Maybe. So, like, what I do, what I think is helpful is those exercises that are meant to, like, the purpose of them is to try to get muscle growth.
Yeah.
Especially if we keep those in for a while, like, are they able to do a little bit more weight for the same rep range and same proximity to failure? So, like, little signs like that, like, it's a pretty good indicator, I think. There's no perfect indicator, unfortunately, but I think that's probably the main one I look at, to be honest. And then if you can get some pictures with as similar as possible lighting and stuff like that, that can give you something sometimes. But let's be honest, a lot of strength athletes don't know how to take great pictures, uh, but that's okay. So you know
Can I
what?
jump in really quick? So you
Yeah.
said if we're going to do an exercise for a while, what does a while mean for you?
Um, probably like at least I'd say at least 4 or 5 weeks, something like that.
Okay. So like a
Um,
sort of normal weightlifting training block.
yeah, I think that's
Okay.
reasonable. Especially, the longer the time frame is, probably the better indication it is.
Mm.
Um, and also like if it hasn't been forever since you did that movement, because what we're trying to avoid is mistaking neural adaptations for actual hypertrophy.
Yeah.
So like if you let's say you want to do I don't know split squats for whatever reason, uh, and you haven't done them in a year, right? You come back and you do them, you're going to get stronger on them pretty quick, right? Um, so like in that case, I'd try to leave it in longer or try to find some other indication or something to look at. But if you just did them a few weeks ago or you've been doing them for weeks, probably a reasonable indicator. Like that skill practice isn't really a thing so much anymore, right? It's that we can be a little bit more confident that it is muscle growth. We don't know for certain 100% that it's muscle growth, but I think that it's unfortunately one of the best indicators we have right now. I will say there's some exciting stuff coming out on like the body comp testing realm that I'm keeping my eyes on because it's exciting to me. They're still very expensive, so it'll be some time I think. But they make these 3D body scanners now that you basically stand on this platform and it spins you in a circle in front of a camera, and it can measure pretty damn well circumferences and things
Wow.
like that, like head to toe, entire body. Um, and they seem to be pretty good. Now they're working on like phone apps that can do similar things. So who knows, man? In a few years from now or something, maybe there's an awesome cell phone app that you just put it on a tripod, spin in a circle, and you're good. And we can get some pretty good circumference measurements from that. So that'd be awesome. I'm keeping my eyes out from that. Grant Tinsley at Texas Tech, who does probably arguably the best body composition testing research. He's been looking at some of those things. So that's exciting. Maybe we'll have that someday.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And to kind of to Jessie's question, when she talks about, how long to do an exercise or a movement, I think that's relevant. And I think another question I would have is like how often throughout the week to do similar movements. So when I think about structuring training, I'll do say on a day one, it's like a snatch focused day, and we'll do maybe it's like I'll call it a push day. So maybe we do some upper pressing, maybe we do some squatting. And then we'll do, pull day following that, and then maybe we'll do like a combo day and then like a lower day. So it's like a 1 to 2 frequent time a week frequency. But if we're thinking about then, you start talking about like fractional sets and all the complicated stuff that's probably over my head with like snatches and cleans and jerks and how all that relates, with a strength athlete who has the complication of the competitive lifts and their variations and then the supportive movements. I guess how do we best approximate like a good frequency, as well as like how we talk about maybe say 3 to 10 sets per session if we're looking at hypertrophy as like a sole outcome, but then across the week for like a strength athlete, what would you kind of use as like a guide to get to a best approximation of what the research says and what your experience says?
Yeah, it's a little messy, as everything is. But I think the frequency the frequency stuff we've gotten from the research is pretty good for strength. It's like if less is more in terms of volume.
Mm.
If you do honestly based on our data, if you do 1 to 3 sets even in a session, like that's giving you just about all the strength stimulus, it seems.
Wow.
So it doesn't take a whole lot, and then you hit that 2-3 times a week, which is what a lot of people do anyway, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying necessarily that you have to stop after just a couple sets.
Yeah.
Like maybe a couple more gets you some muscle growth, which is great for long-term development, right? but we don't need to like pound ourselves into the dirt like powerlifters used to think. So the strength is a little bit more clear cut, right? 2-3 times a week, doesn't take a ton of volume, whatever. And I would imagine, we didn't analyze power, but I would imagine that's a similar thing. You don't want a ton of work necessarily in a session to the point where you're getting really fatigued. You can't move quickly anymore. Weight on the bar is going down a ton. If you're noticing those things, you're probably doing too much, right? But hypertrophy is weird because we see there's not a clear-cut effect of frequency. Yet, it's clearly not the best to do 20 or 30 sets in one day, right?
Yeah.
So the way I'm thinking about it now after doing these projects is like, if it's somebody who cares about strength and power, performance, all those things also, sports, literally anything on top of just muscle growth, then we don't want to sabotage that stuff. And those things, particularly like weightlifting, is we just can't be super fatigued when we come in, right? We got to be able to perform. If they only care about muscle growth, you can be kind of fatigued. It's fine. You can still train hard. But we got to be more careful in that sense. So like, we're not going to be pushing as high volumes as they can recover from in that case. So I think, doing probably, just a handful of sets, maybe it's 3, 4, 5, 6, something, it doesn't have to be a ton in a session. And then maybe you hit that, there's no clear-cut best answer. I personally would say, I think twice a week is still a very good general baseline for things like that, for hypertrophy. I think you can get away with once a week and it's fine. If you're doing once a week, I would probably try to push more volume in there.
Okay.
Personally. But I kind of think of it, here's the broad strokes of how I've been thinking about it. If you're trying to push really high volumes, if you get to a point where you're hitting 10 or more sets in a session, I would split that up into more sessions, just to not be doing those really inefficient sets by the end. If you want to do which kind of directs frequency a little bit, right? If you're somebody who can do really high volumes. If you aren't trying to push super high volumes and you still want to get as much muscle growth as possible, I think it makes sense to lean into this idea that those first few sets are the ones that give you the biggest bang for your buck. So maybe we adopt a frequency of, 2 times, 3 times. You could even do 4 times if it's like a smaller muscle group or something, right? Although I don't know how helpful side delts are for weightlifters. But, you could do it. Why not? Maybe you just also want to be jacked.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of tend to think about it, right? I know that's not a super direct and helpful answer, maybe, but I would lean into generally less is more. And the more you go into the less side of it, the more I might try to get an extra day of frequency in there, just because it's not going to beat you up doing 3 sets of a chest press isn't going to beat you up that much, right?
Yeah.
So you can probably do that at least twice a week, maybe even 3 times if you want to, but I don't think you have to, because again, the strength is the main goal, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. And I think what it says for me is like, you don't have to do 12 sets in a workout because you feel like, oh, if we do 12 sets, like we have to be getting freaking huge. Like that just,
There's more.
yeah, or more, and I guess the next logical question, and this is just a bias. This is a bias everyone has. I would bet money on this. And I'm going to leave you both on the edge of your seat trying to figure out what bias I'm talking about. When I write something, it's always for 3 sets. Like I write, we do overhead press, we're going to dumbbell bench, we're going to do split squats. Like, okay, 3 sets, 3 sets. I don't know why. Like I would love to do some qualitative work on why people program the way they do and generally air for 3 sets. But could we, in theory, come in, do, if we want to, if we're saying the target is shoulders, chest, mostly chest, we're going to do a dumbbell bench. Could we do 6 sets and say that's our push work for the day, or 6 sets of like an overhead press and that's our shoulder work? Or do you think it's worth diversifying? And then if you would agree with it's worth diversifying, it's like, could we do 2 sets with an exercise and do 3 exercises? Do 2 for 2 exercises, 3 sets, or do one exercise for 6 sets? Does that make sense of like how we would distribute that volume we now have across exercises?
For sure. That's the 3 sets thing is so funny. I think that that's very common, I think, also, right? That's me too. I'm just now trying to like being like, why three though, right? Like trying to ask myself that question, write a program. So like now I'll answer the question, right? But just like let's say somebody's doing 2 back exercises or something rather than 3 and 3, I'm like, screw that, we're doing 4 and 2 just for the sake of it, right? Um, but anyway, so I think the distribution thing is if you have a overarching goal that a certain muscle is going to be more helpful towards that goal. Let's lean into that a bit more. So like, I don't know weightlifting that well. I would imagine shoulders are really helpful for something, right? When you put the bar over your head somehow. So yeah, maybe you lean a little bit more into that. Maybe you do, I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, shoulders are really helpful. Triceps probably helpful. Chest maybe not super, super helpful.
Yeah.
Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah.
So maybe, you do, there's no black and white here. I'm just kind of pulling this out of nowhere, but maybe you're doing like 2/3 or so of your volume in that like most helpful muscle group, right? Maybe shoulders in this case. And then because a lot of, especially if it's shoulder pressing, you're using your triceps also. So this is where we get into the fractional thing, where we're already getting some, we don't even have to do hard numbers, but like we're getting some tricep work. I don't have to do as much direct tricep work now because I've already gotten some of it. So, you could do that, maybe a good portion, 2/3 or so, which to be fair, you could easily say half, you could say 3/4, you could say 5/6, whatever, right? Whatever number you want to do. But I would say probably at least some majority in that most helpful muscle group. You're getting some secondary work already. So maybe you do a little bit less on the triceps. Maybe you hit a little bit of chest just to get something, right? We don't want to be, completely ignore a certain muscle group probably. But that's probably how I would think about it, like qualitatively. And then from there, you can kind of experiment, right? Like, so let's say, you threw out 6 sets. Maybe you do 4 sets of some kind of shoulder press. Maybe you do 2 sets of a chest press, and like between the 2 of those, you're getting enough tricep work. That's something, right? Based on our fractional method, that would be 3 sets of triceps, quote unquote, because they each would count as a half. So you try that, see how things go, right? If they're not making progress and we want to try to tinker with it a little bit, I think there's various arguments that could make sense. You could say, let's add a set of the overhead press or whatever shoulder thing they're doing, or maybe if we look at their technique and we can see like they're getting it up over their head really well, but they can't quite, I know you're not supposed to press at the top, right? But maybe we can, for whatever reason, we feel the triceps are actually the limiting factor in this.
Totally.
Case. Maybe we do a direct tricep thing, or So I think you get that rough baseline that makes some sense. Trial run, how's it going? And then from there we try to troubleshoot and either change the allocation a little bit or add something here or take something away from there or whatever. And which specific decision you make, I think depends on the circumstance at hand, right? Talking to the client, looking at their technique, looking at what do we feel is their weak link in this exercise, or so on and so forth.
Well, what I love about this, and Jesse, I can't wait to hear you kind of riff on what he said. What I love about it is that when I started to feel most empowered programming is when I could take a squat workout, whatever, squats during a workout and do, we're going to do, 7 reps at this weight, 5 at this, 3 at this, then 4 at this, 6 at this, and then 8. Because we need this much work around these intensities. We want to build up to this, but we don't want too much fatigue. And it's like, okay, you can become creative because you understand the goal, the athlete, the session, where the session fits in. It's like, okay, so you look at a program I've written now and you're like, this makes no fucking sense. You couldn't you had 1,000 chimps over millions of years. They couldn't write a program that I write. It's just like that chaotic and far out. And what you're saying with hypertrophy work, that's kind of how it's starting to sound of like, oh, maybe overhead press is like a big KPI for us. This is like really important. Let's put 5 sets there, and maybe we do 2 sets of like a dumbbell bench after. So that looks really funky compared to what you normally see, which I like because it feels more directive. It feels more like specific to the person and the sport. I really I'm gonna appreciate that when I go to write a program and mix things up, and people are like, "Why the fuck am I doing 7 sets of
Yeah.
overhead press?
What are we
What the
doing?
fuck
Why
is?"
does it look different?
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah. No, I'm already like my brain is turning on. Okay, what can I do differently with accessory progressions? Probably gonna try it on myself first
Yeah,
as a guinea pig, and then give it to people who works. So
yeah,
There's
yeah, I
so
like
much,
it.
and you're only limited by your creativity, right?
yeah,
Like once you know
totally.
the goal
Mhm.
and like roughly, like you kind of know what's going on behind the scenes. So now you can just get creative and like maybe you could do a top set of your hypertrophy overhead press work and then back offs, right? You could do pyramids. You can do like like you're saying, like sometimes you're balancing. Maybe each set we would anticipate similar muscle growth, but like they're just going to get beat up. Their
Mhm.
elbow hurts if
Yeah,
they do too many sets of 7. So cool, let's do a set of 12 at the end or something,
yeah,
right? Like there's so much stuff you can do. And I have a similar thing. Some of those programs that I've written are just like, what, what is this? But it's also fun. And you know, I think about if you can have a specific reason for something being there, let's do that, right? So like if we think shoulders are the most important, let's make sure we focus
Mhm.
on that. If you ask that question, like, is there a better way to do this? Is there a specific thing I should do here? If not, like if it's we want to do, I know I want to do some chest work. Should I do a press versus a fly, or should I do an incline versus a flat, or you know, and you don't have a good reason to make a
Mhm.
choice,
Yeah,
whatever you want, right? Just have fun. Let the client choose, right?
yeah,
So like if we can have a decision that is based in reason, cool, let's do that. If we don't, if that doesn't apply, then cool, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I think some people get a little bit too bogged down in like there should be a specific reason for every single thing in your program. Most things, yes, right, but sometimes it just doesn't matter, dude.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
sometimes they just want to train their calves. That's fine. Let them train their calves. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Gotta pick your battles on when to be role
Yeah.
specific with the athlete. I feel like we're getting close to time probably, but I
Okay.
just want to speed run this question. Like when you're writing, so say we're talking about a training block, maybe in the beginning of a cycle, Josh, yeah, like with a lot of hypertrophy work, what informs your decisions for rep count on those flies
Mhm.
Yeah.
that we might be writing?
I think so. A couple things I think about. Um, One would be how much of the work are we doing that still has some like strength focus in there or power focus or whatever, right? Um, I would imagine that the fact that you both nodded your head, there's still a little bit in there. Like you're not just only bodybuilding for a
Oh
few
yeah, yeah,
weeks or whatever,
Oh
right?
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I would think about like we want to balance the fatigue, of course, right? So could you do sets of 6 on your pec deck flies? Sure, but like, does that make a ton of sense?
Yeah.
Maybe not. Like you can still grow really well, but maybe you just beat somebody up and whatever. So just like logistical things like that, I think that matters, which would make me then be like, okay, well, if we're doing a lot of heavy work elsewhere, maybe I try to avoid super low rep ranges on the accessory stuff. Um, I also think about if we have like a periodized approach, right? We have this sort of you know, these different blocks, and this more hypertrophy focused block, I might lean into a little bit more some sets of um, you know, I personally what I tend to fall on, and I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, but this seems to make sense based on my experience. A little bit more of like there's some stuff that's like, you know, 6-8 reps, but a lot of it is like 10 to 15. There might even be a couple things here and there where like I just want you to go get a crazy pump and
Yeah.
feel great. So maybe there's some 15 to 20 or something in there, right? But on average a little bit higher. And then the next block, I'm like, okay, well maybe we just tick that down just a hair. So things are just a little bit heavier, not a ton. Maybe now there's a couple more sets of 8 or whatever in there, but um, there's we're more in that kind of 8 to 12 range now or something, right? A little bit of 12 to 15, but you know, so it's just down on average just a little bit. And then let's say now we're getting into our more specific training blocks where things are much heavier. This is where it can kind of feel like a weird, like, well, if you continue that trend, now you're doing your heaviest accessory work also. And I thought you said we wanted to avoid the fatigue. So there, what I would tend to do is now I'm thinking about the fatigue is the most important part at this point, right? We're not building as much muscle in this block. That's not what matters the most right now. So I can drop some sets off or maybe you even allocate those sets to those more specific movements or something. But now you can do those accessory work movements with some lower rep ranges. If we stay further from failure, that accounts for the fatigue thing. And what we've seen from some of the research is that the heavier the weight is, the further from failure you can stay and still get really good muscle growth. So I would kind of lean into that a little bit more and say, like, okay, well, now rather than doing these sets of 12 that are really close to failure, maybe we do some sets of 7 or 8 and we stay further away and we still get some good hypertrophy stimulus. Would that stimulus still be great if we stay far from failure for 6, 8, 12, 20 weeks? Maybe not, but we can do it for this one block and it's fine, you know? So that's how I've kind of tended to think about it, is like gradually on average a little bit heavier, but when the main work is getting to be its heaviest, let's stay a bit further from failure. Maybe we do a few less sets to save the fatigue there, but keep the generally on average heavier loading, which should transfer to a little bit more strength and stuff.
Yeah, no, I love that, and that kind of fits my bias of how you would structure like a competition prep program, right, from start to finish. The one question I would have that I'd be interested to pick your brain on, so and I feel obligated to give Dane Miller a shout out because he has like really creative, wacky exercises through huge ranges of motion and like to target specific muscles. And I love that creativity with exercises, just as we're kind of talking about like set count per movement. Jesse's question about rep ranges would kind of, I would like to explore like the extreme of that, you know, what's the impact of like a 20 rep set or like 25 rep or 30? Is it worth going beyond 15 to 20 reps if we're just looking to build muscle? And then mechanistically, I know there's that whole like type of hypertrophy that's occurring to what part of the, you know, which muscle fibers. And I know what I've read and I know what I've learned, and I know I probably don't know much about it. So could you talk us through like the differences if we are going to explore rep ranges beyond say 12 to 15, and then if they do have a meaningful impact on kind of the way the muscle tends to hypertrophy?
Yeah, the easiest answer is for that second part, that I don't think we have super clear data either way. There's some stuff that indicates maybe that really high rep stuff is a bit more type 1 fibers versus type 2, which is probably not what you want as a strength or power athlete. Also some indications maybe it's like sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, which you could consider swelling or something. If you're a bodybuilder and you just want to look big, sweet, right? But it's not really going to help much for strength. But we don't know for sure, right? That could end up not being correct. So who knows on that one? But the in general, the really high rep stuff I find a bit harder to recommend as a baseline, just because if you're doing sets of 25, 30, you probably got to go to actual failure to max out the stimulus of the set. And like, I don't know if you guys have tried to do that. It's brutal. Like you can always get another rep, right? It's tough. But let's say somebody's knee hurts when they squat, but they can do high rep leg extensions. Guess what, buddy? That's what we're doing, right? Because we gotta stimulate the muscle somehow. So like I think you can use it creatively, like when you need to. You could even do one set like that to kind of pre-exhaust, and then you can go do some lower rep stuff later, right? So there's all kinds of stuff you can do, but it's not like my go-to, just for the reason of you gotta really, really get after that set. And most people, it's not a willpower thing. It's not a you're just not tough enough thing or whatever. Like it's hard, man. It's you know, I don't think I'm a wimp, but like I don't want to do that. I've tried. It sucks. So that's the main reason that I would generally not do a ton of that. But you know,
Okay, awesome. Yeah, Jesse, any last questions? Anything you're interested in knowing?
I don't know. I mean, not outside like where are you going like with your academic career? Where do you hope to be in a couple years? What do you hope to know?
Man, I would love to know the answer to that question myself.
Yep.
I have a year left of the PhD, and then I am considering trying to line up a postdoc, basically to just keep doing more cool. I have some ideas, of research I want to do. It's just so much of it. It's so time consuming, right? That it's I would just need more time to do it. So who knows? I think what I kind of see, I always want coaching and doing this kind of thing, just talking about training. Like I want that to be my biggest thing, right? I don't want to be stuck in an office writing grant proposals for the university all day. But I do love research, and I would love like so. To me, it's I want to be involved in research. It's just to what extent that is, and we'll figure that out as we go. We're gonna have to make up a career along the way, I think, but we'll get there. Other people have done it, man, so we'll figure it out. But yeah, I want to always have a foot in that world, but have coaching and like actually using that stuff be the biggest thing. It's just fun, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Sweet.
That's awesome. And if people are interested in reading your research, which they might have to have a thesaurus and all these other references to be able to support that, where can they go? I mean, especially if they're interested in keeping up with your bodybuilding journey, your academic journey, all that stuff.
Yeah. So Instagram's probably the easiest place. My handle is just jake.remmert_coach. And or my website's just jakeremmert.com. That's easier. You can find coaching info and stuff there. If you're only interested in the research, you can look up my name on like ResearchGate or Google Scholar or something. That'll pop up. If you don't care about all the other weird stuff I'm doing. But yeah, Instagram's probably the easiest, like central place.
And you also have a podcast. I mean, I don't know if you're going to mention it, but the Training Arc podcast.
Yeah. We any anime reference we can slip in there, we always do. I don't know if anyone listening has seen the YouTube version of that. Colby Souza, who I do it with, who's amazing, by the way. He got his PhD with Eric Helms out at AUT, and he's a coach. Like we're the same person basically. So his room is just like picture like shut-in anime nerd.
Yeah,
it's his bedroom.
So funny,
and I love him for it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, and then Jessie, what about yourself?
Instagram also probably easiest. Jessie Stemo, and then Power and Grace Performance as well on Instagram, and easy website powerandgraceperformance.com.
And you mentioned the Women's Collective. It's starting in the summer. Is that right?
We actually had our first meeting this weekend.
Wow.
And it went
Okay.
really well. Yeah. So Women's Coaching Collective, we're going to do quarterly meetings with all female coaches. I mean, it's definitely geared around Olympic weightlifting, but I think that the experiences of coaches in other strength sports would be super valuable in that space. We have a Slack group where everybody has an invite. So we've got the resources. I think I saw you added resources to our shared document. So thank you so much for that. So we have got a shared document of resources and are encouraging everybody to kind of add things that they've found super valuable to their coaching careers. So that's just free to access. And then we've got a couple other channels just for athlete questions. We started after our first meeting, like an equipment swap channel for coaches who are like looking for a pair of weightlifting shoes for an athlete who needs them. Things like that. So I'm excited for it to evolve. I feel like we've had a lot of people who are bought in already. Yeah.
That's super exciting.
So it's on our website like Power and Grace Performance, and then resources, and then you can just sign up and get all the invites, and it's completely free.
Yeah. Awesome. I could obviously go on for hours and hours and hours, so I'm going to gracefully cut myself off. If people are more interested in the philosophical musings, go to Josh_Phil WL on Instagram, Philosophical Weightlifting everywhere else. And we will catch you all on another episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting podcast.